Alright, hello you crazy people out there, this is DragoniteSpam, and welcome back to another Game Maker tutorial, sort of. So, 2 years ago, more than 2 years ago I think, I made this one video on how to make NPCs in a video game, just like one of these like top-down sort of RPG sort of things. And the video was honestly not very good. It got viewed by people, but it was honestly not very good. So I decided that I would kind of just push that one off to the side and make another one, hopefully with like better talking and less messy code and stuff like that. Anyway, so I'm going to get out of there, and I'm going to go over here. You can see in the player's step event, yeah, the step event's over here. I just have a little bit of code saying what to do when you hit keys. Basically, move in the specified direction and like flip the sprite so that you're facing that direction. And in the create event, I just have movement speed equals 5, and that's how fast I'm going to be moving around. Um, I don't even need that. That's just so that if I want to change the movement speed, I don't have to go and change every single one of these lines. I can just change one variable. Anyway, the first thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need a way to interact with the NPCs. So I'm going to go over into the NPCs key press, and that's where the space bar I think I went with the first time. Just referencing my notes over here. Alright, so I'm going to go and drag a little bit of code over here. And I'm actually going to increase this font size because I had it shrunken a bit, whatever the verb happens to be, so that I could like see more in one window. But when I'm recording stuff, I do like to make that a little bit bigger. Anyway, I'm gonna do a couple things before I run the game. First, somebody was getting on my butt about this, but if you put 3 slashes at the top of a code file, one of these like execute code snippets in an event, and you write into it, we can say. We can describe what it does. So something like this. Okay, I'm gonna not make that. Alright, that text was a little bit too big. But you can name your code snippets. So over here, you see what it does without having to open it up and stuff like that. Nice little detail that they added to Studio. Anyway, after that, you're only most likely going to be wanting to talking to the NPC if you're within a certain range. So I'm going to say if distance to object player, because this is happening inside the NPC's object, is less than 64, then we're going to do stuff. 64 is really a kind of arbitrary value. It's about the width of 2 tiles over here, and that should be good for this type of game. You can make this not 64. You can make this like 10 or 500 or whatever. I don't care. It's just going to change the way. It's just going to change how close you have to be able to talk to the person. Let's see. Next, you only want to be talking to the NPC if you're actually facing them, but I'm going to get to that later. So before I do that, I'm just going to make the text box appear, and you need a way to be able to turn the text box on and off. So I'm going to go and run over to the NPC's create event, and I'm going to make a little variable that says draw text, and we're going to set that to false. And I'm going to say if draw text equals, that's 3 equals false, else, so I'm going to say if draw text equals, that's 3, false, else do something. And if this thing over here is false, if you're not drawing text on the screen, you're going to set it to true. And otherwise, we're going to set it to false. You could just say draw text equals not draw text, like that. But I'm going to be writing more code inside these condition statements later, so I don't really want to be doing that. Now, this is basically an on-off switch for drawing the text box at the bottom of the screen. And I'm going to be going over to the draw event. I think you can use the draw GUI event, the draw GUI event, but this is very simple. I'm not going to be messing around with that quite now. So in the draw event, I'm going to draw a rectangle at the bottom of the screen. I'm not going to put any text in it quite yet. So I'm going to be saying draw rectangle. The coordinates. Okay, so I'm taking guesses here. This should be a pretty reasonable position on the screen. For those of you who don't know, view, H view, view, W view, this should be H, not Y. It's a little bit different. Those are related to the views. If you have like a big room, a big map with the camera following the player, some say, I don't know, if you have a big room like this and you want the camera to follow the player with a view, and let's just say something like this, 1280, 720, because that's like the best window size ever. These variables related to the view size, W view and H view, are just going to be the width and the height of it. And using that, you can get wherever in the room you are. And using that, you can use the same positions for like drawing text on the screen, no matter where in the room you are. Anyway, so that's I did not mean to run that yet. No, go away. We want to say if, oh come on, if draw text equals true, then you do this. Otherwise, you're not going to do anything. You also need to draw the NPC itself with the draw self statement. Otherwise, it's not actually going to show its sprite because you have other code in the draw event. Now, something a surprisingly number of people have questioned me about is if you're using GameMaker 8.0 or earlier, the draw self function doesn't exist, and to get this effect, you're just going to have to draw the sprite manually. So something like draw sprite, sprite index image index x y. You just have to say this instead of draw self, or if you want to account for like scaling and rotation and stuff, you would say draw sprite extended, and you'd add the scaling and rotation parameters and everything. But honestly, I know I was still using GameMaker 8.1 for quite a while, but seriously, at this point, you probably should be using Studio. The free version basically has everything that the not free version does, except for like the GameMaker splash screen at the beginning of the game. There's really no reason not to, but that's a rant for another day. Anyway, I run this game, and if I stop thinking about what versions of GameMaker people are using, I'm going to go and run up to one of these guys, and there's a rectangle on the bottom of the screen, and I hit the spacebar again, and it's gone. And if I'm over here, out here, hitting the spacebar, nothing happens. And the same thing would work for the guy in this corner, but I'm not going to go and bother him right now. I do need to set this color to a white because the black text box will make it a little bit hard to read unless you're having like white text on black rectangle or something. But draw set color C white. That's not really a major concern right now. Anyway, next, what text the NPCs are actually going to say. Assuming you want to be able to have as many types of NPC as possible, the variable containing the string of text that they're going to say will best be determined in the create event, the creation code of the instance rather. And I'm just going to say text equals something incredibly immature like that. And I'm going to get out of there, and I'm going to go into the NPC's draw event again, set the draw color back to black because if it's white on white, you won't be able to read that, and draw text at position, how about 32, alright, 32 view H view minus 96. This will just be, this position is just going to be offset a little bit down into the right of the upper left corner of the text box, so this should look fine. Let's see, run the game, and I'm going to run over to you, and as you can see, apparently that guy over there has been playing a little bit too much Portal or something. Alright, great. This works. If you really wanted to, you could just leave it at this and call it a day, but this is rather limited, so instead, there's a few more things I'm going to do. I mentioned earlier, you only want to be able to talk to the NPC if you're actually facing them. So there's a few ways you could do this. The simplest way I know actually is using trigonometry. If you don't know how sines and cosines and positions on the screen work, bear with me, I'll explain it when I'm done writing. So first, for our x equals... Okay, so I set up a temporary x and y position, and this is just going to be pretty much the pixel that the player is looking at, whatever direction they're facing. So you're facing up, it's going to be the position 64 pixels above you. If you're facing down, it's going to be the position 64 pixels below you. In this case, it's based on the image angle of the player because I decided to just be lazy and rotate the sprite to represent the direction the player is facing. Depending on how you programmed your own player movement, you might be wanting to use like direction or your own direction variable that you set up. Degree to radian because direction and image angle is measured in degrees, and sine and cosine uses radians. All right, now you only want the NPC to start talking if they're somewhere within this range. And the fastest way I can think of to check to see if you're within this little range would be to say if collision line players X, player Y, temporary X and temporary Y. Object is going to be a self, so ID. The object that we're going to be checking to see if is in the collision range is going to be ourself, the object that's calling this instance, the NPC, the ID. And precise is going to be false because all these guys are just boxes, and not me is obviously going to be false because we're specifically checking to see if ourself is in the collision range. And oh, I think I cut this out of the video, but I did go and see that this said player.x instead of player.y, and that would be causing all kinds of problems regarding directions, and pretend I never did that in the first place. So let's see, we're going to be running over here, standing in front of you, talking, good. Facing away, talking, nothing happening, and it's a little bit close, but it's working. And there we go. So this guy is going to cause the game to crash because he doesn't have a variable for text and creation code, and I should probably do something about that. So I'm just going to go and write another silly line of something or other down here. There we go. That doesn't sound lame or silly at all. Anyway, there you have it. You have NPCs, but the next thing that you're probably going to want to do is you're going to want to lock the player in place when you start talking to them. So we're going to be going over into player's create event under movement speed, and I'm going to be saying free equals true. And those are capital letters because I somehow hit caps lock. Free equals true. And this is just going to be similar to draw text. This is going to be a little on-off switch saying whether or not the player can move around. So if free, you can respond to a keyboard input and stuff, and else, if free equals false, you're not going to do anything. And over here, this is the trigger to start talking to the NPC. Over here in draw text, if you're setting it to true, you're going to set free to false. And if you set it draw text false, you're going to set free to true. And I'm going to need to reference this with the player object handle, unless you want to make a global variable or something, which I think I did in the first attempt at making this video. Anyway, the reason I'm not just going to go into the player step event and say if npc.drawText equals false in place of if free equals true is because if in the case that you have more than one NPC on the screen, that's not going to work very well. Anyway, so let's run the game. And I'm going to be running around in circles, and I can move, and I'm going to be talking to you, and I can't move with either the ASDW or arrow keys. I'm going to be hitting spacebar, making the text go away, and I can move again. And that's an NPC. Pretty much everything after this point in the video is going to be optional. This all works, but there are a few things that you usually like to do when you're dealing with NPCs. The popular one seems to be scrolling text, and this is definitely something that looks cool and is fun. And to deal with that, instead of, in the draw event, simply saying all of draw text over here, I'm going to be saying draw a certain amount of the text. So string copy. The string is going to be the text. The starting index is going to be 1 because GameMaker is weird and it starts counting string lengths from 1 instead of 0. And the count is going to be another really arbitrary little variable that's going to be t. And let's see, apparently I'm missing like a parenthesis or something somewhere. There we go, I'm missing a comma. And this little variable t is going to increment in every frame of the game. And I'm going to go and first initialize it to 0 over here. T equals 0. And over in the NPC trigger, I'm going to go and say if you're setting it to true, t equals 0 once again. You technically don't need it in the create event, but it's good to have all your variables initialized there anyway. And I should probably label this, and this. So I'm gonna label this start talking. Did I even spell that right? Talking doesn't have two I's. This isn't Dovizul. And down here is going to be end talking. All right. So now my code's a little bit easier to read because that's one thing that many people have been complaining about is that my code is not very well written, and I have to agree. Anyway, so as it is, this is never going to actually draw any text because the variable t is never going to go up. So in every frame of the game, you could make this happen in every step as well, if you really want to keep your draw and step events separate. But to keep things close together, I'm going to just say t plus plus. This will be t plus equals 1 if you're using GameMaker 8.1 or a previous version, because the plus plus operator, the increment and decrement operators were not existing back then. And this is just going to make the text scroll. And if the game would run faster, that would be nice. Thank you. I'm going to go talk to you. The cake is a lie. Scrolling. Gonna run down here. And if I could get in range, same thing. Okay, so that's scrolling text. If you really want to be careful, you could say if t is less than or equal to string length of text, do this only. If you don't have this variable will run away and it'll keep going bigger and bigger beyond the length of the string, but GameMaker will never draw a string that's longer than itself for hopefully obvious reasons. But if you really want to be like diligent in like code stuff, you could just tell it to only increment the variable if t is less than or equal to the length of the string. So that's scrolling text. The next big thing that comes to mind is multiple lines of text. And if you wanted to have multiple lines, you could go over here into the creation code, and instead of just saying text equals this, you could use an array. And you could say if text of 1 is something else, this perhaps. I'm not going to give this guy multiple lines because I don't feel like thinking of another stupid thing to say, but I'm going to put it in an array. That way, it won't start acting weird if I try to talk to them. Anyway, going back to NPCs create, I'm going to set up another variable. So this is going to be the line equals 0, and this is just going to be the line number that you're showing, and you're going to cycle through them. So over here in the NPCs draw event, I'm going to be saying, instead of draw text, draw this position in the text array, the line position in the text array. And to finish it all off in the space event, if you start talking, I'm also going to set line to 0. If you're done talking, you don't have to do anything with line, except there's going to be one more condition, one more thing that you can do when you hit the spacebar, and that's going to be next line of text. And the condition under which this will happen is going to be if line is less than the size of the array. So you can say array length 1D of text. And this is going to tell you how big the array is, the text array. This one is going to be a length 1 because there's one object in it. This one over here is going to have a length of 2 because there are 2 items in it. The length of the array that this returns will always be 1 greater than the last index in it, which can be a little confusing, but just remember you're dealing with numbers of things and not like computer indexes which start counting from 0. So with that in mind, you're going to have to say if line is less than the array length minus 1. You're going to reset t to 0, and you're going to increment the line variable. Basically, if I didn't explain this well the first time, you're checking minus 1 so that you don't ever try drawing an index in the array that doesn't exist. Anyway, going to run the game. There is one note on this array length 1D function, and I'll explain that as soon as I get back over here. Let's see, the cake is a lie. No, I haven't been playing Portal, and we're done. And if we start over, if I can get in front of you and start over, this works fantastically, and it only works again if I'm standing close enough. This function, anyway, it did not exist back in GameMaker 8.1, at least as far as I know. So once again, you're going to have to do a little bit workaround if you're working with previous versions of GameMaker. I did not mean to go and put another player on the screen there. You will just have to manually tell how many lines of text you have. So you can say total lines equals 2. And over here, this guy will have total lines equals 1. Here, instead of saying the length of the array, you can just say total lines in place of that, and it will work exactly the same way with going and talking to you, second line and being done, and this guy down here. Might want to make the range that you can talk to them a little bit smaller because I was standing kind of far away. Anyway, let's see, what else is there? You might want to have the NPC turn towards the player. This is really, the way you program this will be dependent on the way you program everything else in your game. The way you program directions the characters are facing especially. In my case, I can just say image angle equals point direction from my x, my y to player's x and the player's y. And this will just rotate the sprite. Let's see, is that? Oh, okay. So I have a weird habit of hitting a parentheses when I meant to hit an underscore, I guess because the keys are so close together and I'm not paying attention when I type. But this will just rotate the NPC sprite so it's facing the player. If you're working with like a sprite sheet from Chrono Trigger or Pokemon or something, this is not going to work because a rotated character will just look very, very dumb. And you're going to have to do a little bit of working on your own to make that work. But the point is, when you hit the spacebar, if you're standing close enough, the NPC sprite should be able to respond to make itself face the player object. And somebody is mowing the lawn outside. Either that or that's an airplane, which would make more sense because it's December. Anyway, that is NPCs. This video does leave out more complicated things like scripting events and getting more complicated kinds of input from the user, like a yes, no, or like typing your name into a dialog box on the screen. And I might cover that in a future date. Scripting tends to be really complicated, but you can do a lot with it. And it does make it quite easy to program events within your game without having to rely on like timelines and paths and things like that, which are honestly, it's nice the Game Maker provides those, but they're honestly not very good for cutscenes. So, as with pretty much everything else that I've ever recorded on YouTube, as long as I don't like forget, I'm going to go and pack this into a compressed Game Maker archive and put a link for it in the put a download link for it in the description of this video. So I hope you found that useful. I do hope this turns out a little bit better than the other 2 videos I made because those first videos are really honestly really bad. Rate, comment, and subscribe. Watch some of the stuff I have uploaded, and I will see you all later.